Greetings everyone, and thanks for joining us on another Paranormal Pit Stop. Tonight we'll be exploring a major intermodal public transport facility located off of West Cordova Street in downtown Vancouver, BC in Canada that acts as the sprawling city's primary terminus of transit, accessible by way of street-level entrances off of House Street near the Expo line and Granville Street near the Canada line, and rumored to harbor the wandering souls of travelers who passed on from this world long ago. Are you prepared to brave the history and hauntings of Waterfront Station? Historically, Waterfront Station was initially constructed under the Canadian Pacific Railway and would open its gates on the 1st of August in 1914 as the Pacific terminus to the company's transcontinental line, which ran to Montreal, Ontario, Quebec, and Toronto. Starting in 1977, Waterfront would begin a slow transition to acting as a public intermodal transit facility. The same year, the C-Bus was established on a separate floating pier which joined the main terminal by way of a walkway over the line's tracks. And in 1978, CPR operations would be assumed by Via Rail, after which in 1979, use of Waterfront Station would be halted, with its last passenger train departing on October 27th. Through the early 1980s, segments of the once thriving rail line would be demolished to make way for the SkyTrain line, which would open on the 11th of December in 1985. Through the early 1990s, Royal Sea Link Express would operate a ferry line to Nanaimo and Victoria from a dock on the western end of the C-Bus terminal, though this service would eventually cease operations. And in 1995, platforms for the West Coast Express, which would utilize old CPR lines and whose platforms were erected right where old CPR platforms had formerly stood, would be constructed just adjacent to the SkyTrain station. In 2003, Harbor Links would assume operations of Royal Sea Link's old facility at the C-Bus terminal. In 2006, Harbor Links would cease operations following catastrophic mechanical issues with their only vessel. And from 2019 to 2020, Waterfront, which previously featured only upward escalators, would welcome the addition of new escalators and various accessibility accommodations. In the present, Waterfront Station remains open, serving the public's transit needs as either a convenient turnover point along various lines, or as a destination itself, which is surrounded by historic buildings, unrivaled dining and drink accommodations, event hotspots, scenic viewpoints, and more. Through its brief, albeit busy existence, Waterfront has been shrouded in a number of local legends and claims of encounters with paranormal activity that chillingly, unlike many of the other haunts we've covered, have actually been documented with frequency, not just by travelers and tourists, but also by security guards with unshakable reputations and authorities alike. And those frequenting its bounds have told of disembodied footsteps and voices that emanate from empty spaces, of orbs and strange misty forms both captured in photography and also visible to the naked eye, and of instances in which security footage has captured objects floating through the air or shadowy figures that stalk about. One famous account tells of a waterfront night watchman who reported sighting a woman in a red flapper dress, dancing alone in a corridor to the west side of the facility, to what seemed to be 1920s music that drifted on the wind. When the shocked yet curious guard approached this woman, the music abruptly stopped and she vanished in the blink of an eye. Also reported by station guards up into recent times are alarms sounding without cause, strong poltergeist activity that often results in furniture being moved across entire rooms, or even blockading and trapping the living within small spaces, and run-ins with the apparitions of 3 elderly women who are often sighted sitting together on a station bench, as if waiting for a train long since passed. Another famous account from a station guard details an encounter that he described as the fright of his life, in which he was patrolling the northwestern corner of the campus and had just entered an empty room with naught but his flashlight for visibility, when the beam washed across the form of an old woman who was emitting a white glow and who donned a mournful look on her face. As the guard was stood in stare, the old woman slowly reached out to him, resulting in his panic-induced flight from the area. Similarly, another account from a separate security guard tells of how he was making his way through the former kitchen when he came face to face with the entity of an elderly woman who stared at him intensely for a moment before floating directly at him and causing him to flee. Disturbingly, after this encounter, it said the guard kept seeing the woman's face everywhere, even in his dreams, and eventually had the overwhelming urge to paint her, even though he wasn't an artist in the least. When this guard finished his painting, he returned to the kitchen and left it right where he'd seen the old woman, and it's said from that point forward, her spirit ceased to haunt him. Chillingly though, staff has since moved the painting several times. Each time they've done so, whoever did the moving is plagued by nightmares of the old woman that continue until the painting is returned to its rightful place, which, might we add, it always has been. A final legend intertwining with actual dark history and surrounding the mess of rail lines just north of the station tells of how, in 1928, brakeman Hub Clark was performing repairs in the rail yard during a light rain when he slipped on the wet tracks and was knocked unconscious. Horrifically, no one noticed him where he'd fallen, and eventually a passenger train came along, decapitating Hub in the blink of an eye. Since the night of this tragedy, a slew of conductors, crewmen, passengers, and locals to the area would begin reporting sightings of the headless brakeman roaming about the surrounding landscape, with a lantern in one hand and the other outstretched in search of his missing cranium. Thanks for tuning in for this Paranormal Pit Stop. If you enjoyed our histories and ghost stories, subscribe to our channel, like this upload, and share us with all of your friends. We'll catch you next time.